Good afternoon, everyone, and we welcome you back to the afternoon session of Forum on Science and Faith, an event organized by the Research Center for Natural and Applied Science and the Research Center for Theology, Religious Studies, and Ethics. So we are going to have 4 paper presenters for this afternoon. And to get it started, may I now call on stage the Assistant Director of the Research Center for Natural and Applied Sciences, Professor Mario Tan, to introduce our speaker.
Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Reverend Father Nicanor Pier Giorgio Austriaco, OP, Ph.D, STHD, MBA. Reverend Father Nicanor Austriaco, OP, earned his Bachelor of Science in Bioengineering, summa cum laude, at the University of Pennsylvania, and his Ph.D. in Biology from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he was a Howard Hughes Medical Institute Fellow. He then pursued a fellowship at the Ludwig Institute for Cancer Research at the University College London. Ordained as a priest in 2004, Father Austriaco completed advanced theological studies, earning summa cum laude degrees in theology and a pontifical doctorate in sacred theology in 2015. Father Austriaco is a professor at the University of Santo Tomas, teaching biological sciences and sacred theology, and also serves as a professorial lecturer in philosophy at the University of the Philippines. His laboratory focuses on developing vaccines for COVID-19 and African swine fever, as well as engineering microbes for treating diseases common in the Philippines. From 2005 to 2022, he was a faculty member at Providence College. His research on program cell death, funded by the U.S. National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation, contributed to understanding genetics in model organisms like yeast. He received the 2021 Outstanding Scientific Paper Award from the National Academy of Science and Technology of the Philippines for his work on COVID-19 mobility modeling. During the pandemic, he contributed to the Octa Research Philippines and the T3 Task Force, providing expertise on pandemic management. Father Austriaco was recognized with the 2024 Gabay Award for Public Service for his work on the Philippines COVID-19 vaccine distribution strategy. As a moral theologian and ethicist, he has advised the U.S. and the Philippine Catholic bishops and the Vatican. He currently serves on the Private Sector Advisory Council of the Philippines, advising the President on healthcare issues. Ladies and gentlemen, Father Nick Austriaco.
So thank you for that kind invitation. Before I begin my lecture, I decided that since there are students here, I wanted to talk about faith and science in a much more personal sense. So a lot of people will ask me, how can you be a priest scientist? You see, so the very nature of faith and science, my entire, in many ways, my life brings together these two. And so my students, I have a large laboratory here at the university. We sometimes stay in the lab until midnight, and we're working on our yeast. We have very deep conversations about life and death, love especially, because it was Valentine's recently. And often, of course, because I am a priest, the question of God comes up. And a lot of people have asked me, and I thought I would begin my lecture this way, like, why am I a priest scientist? How can you bring these two together? And I think I'll begin with a little autobiography. So I was born here at the University of Santo Tomas in the hospital, and I was actually baptized by one of my Dominican brothers, si Father Adelid, who is still alive. So he baptized me, and he lives on the same floor as I do in the convent here at the university. For most of my young life, in so many ways, science was my God. So I went and pursued an undergraduate degree in engineering. Why engineering? Because both my parents have PhDs in engineering. And even though I wanted to study cancer, I didn't know how anyone studied cancer. So they decided, my parents are engineers, bio is cancer, so I'll do bioengineering. So I pursued a PhD, an undergraduate degree at bioengineering. And it was in my second year, in my sophomore year, that I met in an honors course at the University of Pennsylvania. It was a great providence, in God's providence. I met a professor, a cancer biologist, Peter Knowles, very famous scientist who discovered the first chromosomal abnormality associated with cancer. I took a course on cancer biology with him, and in that entire course, we debated the nature of cancer. And he believed that cancer was really many, many independent diseases. And my argument with him, and I wrote a paper on this for my course in my second year at the university, is that it's one disease. It's the disease of aging, that cancer cells do not age. And so by the end of the semester, he said, I hope you can do something about that. And so when I went to pursue my PhD, I wanted to pursue my PhD in the biology of aging, and that's what I ended up doing. I went to MIT to pursue aging research. There was no one in the world doing aging research at the time, but by the grace of God, a close friend, Brian Kennedy, who will be visiting the university hopefully in April to give a talk, he and I convinced our professor, Lenny Guarenti, to give us 1 year to do the biology of aging of yeast. God blessed our work, and my advisor is expected to receive the Nobel Prize for the work that we did in trying to show that there are actually genes associated with aging. And so at 24 years of age, I had accomplished what I wanted to do. I would be able to go into a conference in Europe, and everyone knew who I was because I had done this work, and it was groundbreaking work, and he's the aging guy. And so they would do that. And at 24 years of age, I discovered that having accomplished all of that in science, there was still a deep, profound emptiness in my life. And at that time, in God's providence, I met the Catholic Fellowship at MIT. So the Catholic Fellowship at MIT was a group of 35 students from undergraduate and graduate degrees at MIT, some of the most intelligent people I have ever known in my life. And so on a Friday night, when my lab mates would go to the bar, I would go to CF in Building 10 at MIT, and we would talk about theology. We would talk about Christianity. We would talk about Catholicism. And I was profoundly shocked to discover that the Christian faith was reasonable. But what was most important, very personal, is that my friends at MIT had something I did not have. They had joy. And because I was a very intelligent but very miserable man, very well accomplished, but had not discovered the purpose of life. And my friend said, you have to meet Jesus Christ. And I was like, at 24 years old, PhD candidate at MIT in molecular biology, I didn't know what that meant. And so they said, you have to meet Christ. Well, I am here. I am a priest scientist. Because I met the Lord on the 7th of May in 1996 at 5:30 in the afternoon. So you see, even now, 25 years later, that encounter with Christ, that encounter with love so radically changed my life that I have spent the last 25 years pursuing Christ, speaking about him, doing science for him and for his poor, doing everything because of that encounter. So if you ask faith and science, and I'm going to show you some of the reasonability of faith and science. I'm going to show you how Catholic faith and evolutionary biology can be brought together. It's hard work, but it takes the intellect to do. All of this is in the head. But I will tell you that I am a priest-scientist, I am a Catholic, I am a Christian, and I am a professor here at UST because of Jesus Christ. That is what I am here for. And I will not be able to stay for the Q&A, for the open forum, because my brother and I, we have to go to Jakarta for an ordination of our brothers. But I just wanted to begin my lecture, it's a formal lecture, by explaining to you that at the end of the day, faith and science is about a person. It is about a friendship. My friendship with my Savior has been 25 years, and he's up and down. And and you get to discover he can be incredibly crazy. He's very demanding with his love, and yet he's incredibly merciful with his grace. And that this lecture that I'm about to give is simply an invitation for you. If you have not encountered Christ, there's a uniqueness about Christianity. Christianity, unlike the other religious traditions of the world, Christianity is about a person. And it is a radical person, this person who has risen from the dead, who is alive today, who is so alive that he can bring life to your life as it was to mine. He is the cause of my joy. And he is the one who brought me to UST to do this work for him and for the Filipino people. And it's a great privilege to be here to introduce you to that work. So today what I'm going to do is to show you the reasonability of theology, the other side. So I work primarily, my primary focus here during my service in the Philippines is in science. I'm a molecular biologist, and what my students and I am here, hopefully, God willing, to prepare our beloved country for the next pandemic. And so we are working to put into place the infrastructure, both at the level of science, but also organizationally, trying to establish centers of excellence in our beloved country and to staff them with the individuals who will help our people when the next pandemic comes. And that is expected within the next 20 years. It could be next year, it could be next 18 years from now, but the idea is that we will prepare. This is the other side, this is theology. And here what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to ask this question that every Christian has to respond to. How does evolutionary science impact the way that we think about the world? And so I'm going to talk to here about Adam. So what we'll see is that if you this was in 2014, if you go ahead and do a survey of individuals in the United States to ask whether or not Adam and Eve were historical people, 56% of this survey done about 10 years ago said yes. And I presented a much more scholarly version of this lecture a couple of days ago. This is much more an overview because I knew the students here are primarily not theologians and philosophers, but are science STEM students. And I wanted you to get a sense of STEM. So the question now is, and this is in the same way that we are designing experiments. So when my students and I design an experiment, we start off with a question. This is the question that we are addressing here. This is a theological project. Can we provide a coherent narrative that defends a historical Adam after Darwin? And my lecture is going to divide into 3 bits, and I'm going to just quickly, again, this is not a theological class, but I need to give you a sense of the theology. Then I have to give you a sense of the biology. And then I have to give you a sense of how faith and science work together to resolve some of the tensions that can occur. So we're going to begin with original sin, then original DNA, and original history. So original sin, a lot of people have heard of original sin, but I need you to come into contact with what original sin is. It's a theory. Just like in science, we have theories and hypotheses. It's a theological theory. It's an account, an explanation for something. And here we're trying to explain the brokenness that you experience in your heart. the tendency to be selfish, the tendency to say and do things that you do not want to do, even and especially to the people you love. You hurt the people you love, and you choose not to, but you do. And this seems to be something that's inherently broken in us. It's done even in little children. And so the doctrine of original sin is actually about an explanation for this. And a lot of people will say, why do we need a doctrine of original sin? So if I wanted to put a picture of original sin on one slide, the doctrine, the theory of original sin, it would be this slide. So the idea here, and this of course is the painting from Michelangelo's ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, is that something happened in the past. When human beings were created, we were good. And then something happened, we are broken. That's really the account, very simply put. Something happened historically that broke us. And not just broke us in the sense of physically broken, but in our deepest point of our very selves, there's something not quite right. And this is the theory, the proposal, the doctrine of original sin. It is actually, Muslims do not have this. So the Muslims do not have an account of original sin. The brokenness is somehow a part of who we are as humans. For Christians, it is not the way we should have been. And the reason for this is that if you get rid of the doctrine of original sin, you end up with two things. You end up with an account that says that sin flows from human nature as God had intentionally created, that God made us sinners. And deep down inside, because of who we know God is, we say this cannot be true. And we say, therefore, that God deliberately created us, you and me, broken. Now, we know this cannot be true because even when we make things, we try to make it perfect. So God, who is most excellent, most beautiful, most good, most true, if we don't do it, he certainly wouldn't have done that. So he would not have made us broken. So why are we broken? This is original sin. Now, what you're going to see is that the doctrine of original sin is actually something about God. It's not really about us. It tells us about God. It says that God was good, that God is good, and that God made us good, and he always chooses the good for us, and yet we, because we are broken, end up messing up. This is the doctrine of original sin. Now, when we get to the original DNA, and this is when I'm moving from theology to science, so I'm going to say, what does science say about how we began? You will get something like this. So again, this is one of the most contemporary accounts of evolutionary history with regards to our origins. So you have Homo sapiens. So Homo sapiens is over there, and then you have one of the ancient hominids over here. And actually, you don't have it here, but there is now a Homo lusiensis. And so we actually have an ancient human hominid who lived in the Calao caves in Cagayan. And he lived about 15,000 years ago. He's now extinct, but it's 15,000. So what happens is you have a very complicated bush of hominins and hominids. There are technical differences between the two. But how exactly did this play out, and how does Adam fit into this picture? So the question is, what can human genomic science, what does natural science tell us about the origins of our species? And I'm not sure who here is not a biologist. Okay, raise your hand if you're not a biologist. Cool. Most. Okay, so I'm going to go over some biology. I wanted to make sure, right? We're going to start with a genome. So a genome has all the genetic material in an organism. And for us, this is for us, if you have a human cell, the human genome is comprised of two parts. So you have the nuclear genome. This is the part that half of it comes from your father and half comes from your mother. And then this is the mitochondrial genome. This is a very small piece of DNA that carries just a handful of genes. This one you inherited only from your mother. So this is your mother's lineage, and this one here is your father and your mother's lineage. And if you look at a chromosome, the chromosome is actually an extended piece of DNA. And so if you take all your DNA in one cell and you stretch it out, it's about 2 meters long. It's about 7 feet long. Now, one of the great mysteries of biology is that how can you take a spaghetti, imagine going to Jollibee and getting a 2-meter long spaghetti, and I have to put it into a cell. And the largest cell is the egg cell, and the egg cell is the period at the end of a Times New Roman font 12. It's a visible cell. It's actually the only visible human cell. So how am I going to take this 2-meter long thread spaghetti and roll it up so I can fit it into that cell? And I have to fit it into that cell in a way that I know where all the genes are. That's an incredible mystery that remains today. And the 21st century is the century of biology. So we're 1/4 of it through. And one of the challenges we're going to do in collaboration with chemistry is to try to figure out how all of this DNA is organized in such an intrinsically sophisticated way. So this is DNA. DNA is made up of 4 chemicals. They're abbreviated GATC. And DNA is basically a string of these letters. This is the gene for a gene that I spent 11 years working with in the United States. So this is the BAX inhibitor gene that my students and I studied there before I returned to the Philippines and pivoted my research to deal primarily with trying to solve problems, using molecular biology, deal with problems associated with the poor that the poor Filipino struggles with. So this is, and we imagine your genome is about 3 billion of these, okay? It's multiplied by 2 because you have 3 billion from your father and 3 billion from your mother. Now, what we can do today is we can compare genomes. So in the way that we can compare text, we can compare genomes. And I want you to think this way, right? So if you have a final exam and I have 2 papers and they have similar answers, I can compare the answers. And if they're similar answers, what does this tell us about the relationship between these exams? What you have is that they have a common origin, right? This is called common origin because this is the original and this is the copy. We call that cheating, okay? So if I have two texts and I'm comparing them and they have similarities, the idea is that there's common origin. So what we do in biology is that we can take all of the genomes and we can compare them. And it turns out that when you compare them, you have common origin. And they're common origin in this way. So for example, this is the casein beta gene. This is the DNA. And you can compare that the animals that are more similar to each other, their genes are more similar to each other. So it's common origin. And, you know, a lot of people do not realize that the common ancestor for the whale is a hippo, right? So this is why we believe whales are descended from terrestrial mammals, because if you look at their genes, the most related species is a hippo. So it tells you something about history. Now, for humans, we can do the same thing. If you look at all the genomes of the people in the world, and of course, your genome has not been sequenced, but we have been able to sequence many, many thousands of genomes, and we can compare them. This is the story we get. So you are down here. So many of us are Asian. There are Melanesian, Asians, Europeans, and Africans. And what happens is that we have a common origin about 100,000 years ago. So we are descended from, all of us are descended from original population of 100,000 years ago. And in fact, there are Neanderthals and Denisovians. So Neanderthals and Denisovians are other human-like creatures that we share our DNA with. So the account today, the most common account, is that where did we all come from? We all came from Africa. We are descended from a small group of archaic humans. And then over the last 100,000 years, we migrated throughout the entire globe. Have you ever wondered why the Native American Indians look like Chinese? And the reason they have the features of Asian features, the colors, the shape. The reason for that is because their ancestors came from that part of the world during when the Bering Strait was simply still a land bridge. It's about 14,000 years ago. And so they were able to migrate, and they were able to migrate all the way down to the southern part of South America. So what you see is that the first scientific consensus is that modern humans have a common origin. All of us date to about 200,000 to 100,000 years ago, and that sometime around 60,000 or so years ago, we spread out of Africa. This is called the first scientific consensus today. The second is regarding the number of people that were present in the original population. And this is something, how many mating pairs 65,000 years ago will explain the diversity we see today. And when I teach this in class, I show this picture, right? So this is a pedigree of beagles. So this is daddy beagle and mommy beagle. And you have all the baby beagles. And if I say, does this pedigree make sense? You'll say yes. But if I do this, you will say it doesn't make sense because I cannot get a Dalmatian from a single mating pair of two beagles. So you know that it must be like this. These two came from this, and this one came from that. So you see how by looking at the present population, you can calculate how many breeding pairs must have been 65,000 years ago. Do you see? We just work our way backwards, just like you and I worked our way backwards in this very simple explanation. And what you see here is it's about 1,000 to 2,000 mating pairs. So we never get down to one. There is never one pair of Homo sapiens. Very important to point that out. So how the heck do we deal with Adam and Eve? So one more thing. There's another scientific consensus. If you notice, you and I are called, so we are descended primarily from Han. So there are two populations in the Philippines. You have the valley, the land, the lowland people, us, and then we have the mountain people, the Ayeta. Now, what we know is that from our origins, we are descended from the Han, migration from Taiwan about 5,000 to 8,000 years ago. But the Aetas are much more ancient, okay? So the Aetas came tens, if not 20,000 years ago based on their genetics. And you see, if you notice, they look African. They look African because they are closer to the root than we are. Now, what we can do is we can look at the interbreeding between these populations. And so if you look at Han, that's me, most of us, I've had my genome scanned. 4% of my genome is from the Neanderthal lineage. So these are the Neanderthals, there's inbreeding. Very little for the Denisovians. So the Denisovian is another ancient human species. Chinese have very little. But it's interesting, if you look at the Aetas of the Philippines have the highest percentage of Denisovian DNA in their genomes today. So we know that their ancestors are different from our ancestors. Their ancestors met the Denisovians probably 40 or 50,000 years ago, and they bred with them, and so they carry some of the Denisovian genes in a way that you and I do not. Now, if you look at the recent history of our species, what you discover is something interesting. So Florensis is the population from Indonesia, from the Flores, and Homo luzoensis is also here, very recent, but it's now extinct. You and I have never met a Homo luzoensis from Cagayan. My family is from Cagayan. Now, what happens is that what we know is that our species, Homo sapiens, occurs in two different kinds. There is anatomically modern Homo sapiens, and then behaviorally modern. So anatomically modern, they look like us, but they do not behave like us. Behaviorally modern, they look like us and they behave like us. And you will say, what does that mean? This question mark is the appearance of art, the appearance of jewelry, the appearance of music in history. So somehow, we still don't understand why. The evolution of our species, if you go back 250,000 years ago, the hominins then look like us, but they do not have what we have. Something happened. Something happened here that changed them. Now, and this is a facial reconstruction of a behaviorally modern human. Looks like us, behaves like us. Now, my students say they're still around. They walk around in New York. So what happens now is, when would you have recognized someone like this? And the question goes, what are you, right? So, and this is where I rely on Aquinas. So this is why I had to give an extended lecture on this. We are rational creatures. We are able to think in conceptual thought. And what that means is that if I ask you, what is this? This one item, you can give me many, many different concepts, ideas for that one thing. It's a thing, it's a gadget, it's a cell phone, it's an iPhone. These are more and more specific descriptions of that one item. Animals cannot do this. Okay, this is abstract thought. So the question now is, when did abstract thought appear in history? This is the question that I'm trying to deal with. And the proposal that I'm going to make, that I defended last week, that I don't have a chance to go into more detail, is that abstraction and language come together. Hierarchical language, our language. And so the question now is, when did hierarchical language appear? And the idea is that we are rational animals because we are speaking primates as well. So let me conclude my talk with just a few slides to show you how it all comes together. If you look, this is Noam Chomsky. He's a linguist, father of modern linguists. He's a professor emeritus at MIT, where I did my Ph.D. He will say that language evolved primarily for you to talk to yourself. When people think about language, they think, oh, it's for me to talk to you. No, you spend most of your time talking to yourself. And what do you talk to yourself about? You talk to yourself about the world. And you use language to organize the world in your head. Okay? So he says that only after this do you then have the capacity to talk about it. You have to think about, well, some of my students are not thinking before they talk, but usually you think first and then you talk, okay? And most people do that. Now, there are people who will think as they talk, and that's really cool too. And there are scientists who do that, and you can just see they're talking, boing, they just go, oh, they surprise themselves with their thoughts. And it can be quite cool to see that happen. What happens is that Noam Chomsky proposes, I cannot go through the reasons why, that the ability to speak, the ability to have the capacity for language appeared in one person about 100,000 years ago. And it is a genetic mutation that alters the circuitry, the architecture of your brain, that allows you to have this linguistic capacity, and the hierarchical linguistic capacity called merge. And basically, Ian Tattersall, remember that question mark between anatomically and behaviorally modern? The view actually is it is language that allows that. It is the evolution of language. So the human being is walking down, he looks like us, but it is when his brain changes that allows him to have this capacity for language that then leads to art, to music, to jewelry, to things that we associate with our cultures. And so the invention of language is the only plausible explanation for that. It's called the leap. The leap between anatomically modern and behaviorally modern. So this is the idea. The first individual of our kind, Adam, is the first hominin who evolved the linguistic capacity. Since all of us can speak, we must have been descended from Adam, you see? Because there's a genetic mutation that changes his brain. Now, there are debates that I've had with molecular biologists and evolutionary biologists about how does this mutation get fixed in the population, but we're dealing with that question. So when would you have recognized your first ancestor? You would recognize him because you could speak to him. Prior to him, there would not have been anyone able to speak to him. There are 7,000 languages, and we're going to go. All right, so what we're going to do here is that at the end of the day, you have Adam appears when this hominin appears for the first time. There is a fall, an act of disobedience. There's a spread of this over the world. And at the end of the day, we have what we have today. So thank you so much. This part of this work has been part of my collaboration with several scholars from all over the world. We have a book coming out from the Catholic University of America Press, hopefully next month. I just submitted the final proofs and the index 3 days ago. So hopefully be published in the next month or so, where we try to show the reasonability of faith and reason. Salamat po.
Thank you very much. So maybe again call on stage Father Nick, because we need to award the certificate of appreciation to be given by the two research centers, and maybe also call on stage Professor Joel Sagut and Professor Mario Tan. And maybe also call on stage Dr. Tongol, who is the director of Arsinas. So the certificate reads, the Pontifical and Royal University of Santo Tomas, the Catholic University of the Philippines, presents the certificate of appreciation to Professor Father Nicanor Pier Giorgio R. Austriaco, OP, Ph.D., STHD, in grateful acknowledgement of his contribution as an invited speaker with a paper entitled, When Did Adam Appear in Evolutionary History? During the Forum on Science and Faith on the 20th of February 2025 at the Thomas Aquinas Research Complex Auditorium, UST Manila, Philippines. Signed, Professor Bernard John V. Tongol, Ph.D., Director of Arsinas, Professor Joel C. Sagut, Ph.D., Director of CTRSE, and Reverend Professor Janelle N. Abogano, O.P., DTH Pat SC, Vice Rector for Research and Innovation, University of Santo Tomas. A round of applause, please. Thank you. Once again, thank you very much, Father Nico Austriaco. A round of applause, please, again.